Game over, man. Game over.
Johnny. You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
Roll out.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 592 for July 1st, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, for this week's show. I'm very excited to dive into our top 5 movies of the year so far. We are halfway through the year. It is hard to believe.
That is a scary
But-
thought. Don't say it that way.
Here we are.
Time flies, and not always for having fun.
It's crazy. The summer season is kicked off in some major ways, and it's crazy to think that we've seen a lot of great movies. We're halfway through the year, and before you know it, we're going to be into the fall season. So, just trying to enjoy the summer where we're at.
Well, I will say one blessing here, or one good thing. Your voice sounds a lot better, my friend. You're sounding good now. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it because I feel the exact same. I don't feel any different than last week. If it sounds different, that's at least exciting. I'll take that.
Oh, it sounds a lot different. You more or less sound like your old self right now.
Okay, I don't feel that way, so that is great to hear. I'm still in the late stages of recovery. I still have a cough that I cannot shake. I still feel like my voice is a little shaky. My appetite isn't quite back to being at full force. So I'm glad that I can at least come off as being healthy, even though I certainly don't feel that way.
You're being a good salesman right now.
Yeah. So it's still got some ways to go, which is partially, I guess, to reveal the curtain here a little bit in terms of the behind the scenes. It's been a little bit of a chaotic mess in terms of trying to schedule and organize reviews because I really can't get to the theater right now. And it's especially ironic when you have a film like Quiet Place come out where the bulk of it is, shocking, kind of quiet. And I can't go see a movie like that because I can't shake this cough.
Right.
So I can't sit in a theater for 2 hours annoying and disturbing the people around me as I cough every 30 seconds. So, it's a bit of a struggle. I did end up seeing Kinds of Kindness over the weekend. I tried to strategically find a screening that didn't have a whole lot of people in it. There was probably about 10 of us in the theater, and I sat up all the way up in the top row, kind of in the corner. I tried to isolate myself.
Smart.
I brought a sweatshirt with me so that way I could essentially muzzle myself.
You
if
can
I
muffle
had to cough.
it. Yeah. You basically had your giant mask to really carry with you.
I had a bottle of water, and I essentially ate my weight in cough drops throughout that entire screening. So I got through it. It wasn't entirely perfect, but I think I did enough that I didn't disturb the other 9 people in the theater with me.
Yeah.
But
It's going to be hard to do that for a movie like A Quiet Place.
Yeah.
Not just because it's meant to be a quiet experience, but it's also one of the big movies of the weekend. It's going to be hard to strategically time that one to find a screening that's maybe less populated, especially given the fact that you're still working a full-time job, right? So it's not like you can go at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday.
That would be great. Yes. I would love to be able to take off work and go to a 10 a.m. showing. Those are always the best. But I can't do that. I'm still working, and there's, of course, the parental duties. So, finding the time has been a little bit of a challenge. But
just call in sick. We're all adults. We always call in sick for
I missed essentially an entire week last week of work. So, it's my life is just a little bit chaotic at the moment. But we were able to get some guests. We're going to have some guests that'll be able to help fill in for some of these conversations.
Right.
Where I've, been struggling to get to the theater. However, that is to say, despite me being sick and, not getting to the theater as much as I would like to, that doesn't mean others aren't, because the parade is still very much on. The parade
hasn't ended yet.
It has not ended. Literally, the parade was on here in South Florida. I guess a little bit of a rabbit hole here because the Florida Panthers obviously had their Stanley Cup parade over this last weekend. And I took my son and my wife to the parade. It is South Florida. It is the summertime. We do tend to get a lot of rain this time of year.
Sure.
And Sunday morning, as they were holding this parade, not only did we get a little bit of rain, we got a lot of bit of rain. And they did not care. The parade organizers did not care that it was absolutely pouring. So my wife and myself and my son, we went to the parade. We got there about an hour early and we were drenched. It just
That's hilarious.
poured.
Wow.
It came down. And I felt a little bit heartbroken, maybe not heartbroken. I felt a little sad for Sam because I could tell near the end of that first hour we were there, as we were approaching the start time for the parade, that he was starting to become miserable. Like he was getting wet and cold and tired. And I just don't think he really wanted to be there. And it's a celebration, right?
Yeah.
They won the Stanley Cup. This is something
with that. Yeah.
It's supposed to be fun. So I didn't want him to just sit there and be miserable. So we were contemplating, do we leave? Should we stay? Because the parade is about to start. Well, right as the parade is about to kick off, lightning in the area. So the organizers decided, okay, rain is one thing, lightning is a different thing. So they did put a little bit of a pause on the start time. Now, come to find out, they actually ended up not starting the parade until 11:45. So if we ended up staying, we would have had to stay for another 45 minutes. And I just couldn't let Sam sit there and be miserable for another 45 minutes. So what we ended up doing is leaving our post, and we were like right at the beginning of the parade. However, because we were at the beginning of the parade, where the vehicles had started to line up, you could see where the players' buses were. So I said, let's just head toward the players' buses.
Yeah.
See if we can see any of them out there on our way back to the car, because it was going to be about a 1.5 mile walk anyway back to the car. So I said, let's just walk by, see what happens. And we ended up crossing the street. We ended up going down where the buses are and the players are, and they're all out there. The players are on top of the buses. They're all drinking and having a great time.
You really lucked out. You found the right outlet there. That was amazing.
We lucked out big time. Yeah. So, because that's all we wanted to see anyway. So we go there and we see the players coming out. Sasha Barkov has the Stanley Cup, and I got some video of him holding up the Stanley Cup. They're drinking champagne out of it, and it was really fun just to kind of go through that stretch of road. And there was probably like 9 or 10 buses just for the players and their families, and they're all out there partying and having a great time. And so we got to see the players up close. We got to see the Stanley Cup up close, them drinking out of the cup, of course.
Yeah.
And
that's all that matters.
So and then once we got moving, Sam's spirits rose. And so we spent probably another 20 minutes just, walking by the players, taking videos. And they were also throwing like these little beach balls. The players were like out into the crowd, and Sam got a couple of those, and that really lifted his spirits even further. So that's great. Really great.
That's great.
It turned out fantastic, despite sitting in the rain, in the pouring rain for an hour and him getting cold and miserable. It actually ended up working out to be great. And so
he literally takes something home to remind him of that for years to come. It's not like you're trying to get an autograph or anything like that.
No, yeah. And that's like, even before we ended up walking over to the buses, that's what we were trying to tell him. Like, just think of the memories. Like a year from now, we'll laugh at this. Like, remember when we went down there and it was pissing rain for an hour, and we'll laugh at it, and we'll still be able to do that. But
for sure,
and that worked for a time. Eventually he just got to a point where we had to leave. And so, and it worked out nice because the buses couldn't go anywhere. They were all waiting for the lightning, I guess, to go away. And So they were just parked there, and the players were having a great time, and we just happened to find a nice route where we could kind of walk by. So like it worked out wonderfully. I was very excited for that. So anyway, long story short,
you made your son happy. Proud dad moment. Worth
and it was a great moment for Brandy and I as well. Like just as a family, it was fantastic, and it worked out wonderfully. And it's a memory now that we can certainly look back at and kind of laugh and certainly cherish. So as far as the real parades go, it was fantastic. The parade was on, rain and all. It did not matter that the sun had completely disappeared through the entire event. So, and then, we got some food and we ended up going home and we watched the rest of the parade on TV because they broadcasted it live here locally. So, it was fantastic. So as far as the box office parade goes, it is equally still on though, because Inside Out is Inside Out 2, the first film of this year to cross the $1 billion mark, which is very exciting. And, it was kind of funny, Brendan, because I go back to that initial conversation we had about a month ago now, and we were trying to determine, trying to decipher after May and how barren that month seemed to be. Was there going to be anything that would hit massively this year? And we talked about Inside Out 2, and I wasn't sure. Inside Out, the first film from 2015, also made $1 billion.
Yeah.
But we're in a post-pandemic world, all those factors we talked about. I was honestly a little dubious, but here we are. Inside Out 2 crosses $1 billion. And
we talked about that just last week. We said we knew this was going to hit $1 billion, and we knew it was going to happen very soon. I think when we said that, at that time, it was around 750 million worldwide. So it was 75% of the way there. We knew it was going to happen in a couple of days, and it did happen in a couple of days. This is making its way to $1.5 billion. Like that is in the conversation. We're at a point now where this is actually going to be one of Pixar's record-breaking films. And
that's
could
hard,
be, yeah. That's hard to believe, in a post-pandemic world like this. And I just hope that next year's Elio has at least some kind of success to back up the idea of original content for Pixar, and that it's not just gonna, like all of a sudden, if Elio fails, are we going to get announcements that, hey, Toy Story 5 is coming up, but guess what? We're also announcing Toy Story 6 through 10. like that could be the case. I don't want that. Yeah, and we talked about that a lot last week, so we don't have to get too far into that. But you are right there as far as Pixar's strategy goes. I don't know if this is going to be good or bad for Pixar, but it's good for them now because they need a hit.
They needed a hit, yes.
Yeah,
but
short term, I'm happy for them.
Exactly. And Inside Out 2 was a very good movie. I very much did like it. And while I can appreciate that in a vacuum in terms of original content, you're right. And we talked about that a lot next week. And I'm sure we'll talk about it more in the future. But yeah, Inside Out 2 hits $1 billion. And real quick, because we talked about at least from our perspective, the notion that, that film is centered around hockey.
Yeah.
And the NHL just had a really big week with the Stanley Cup Finals, and the ratings were fantastic and everything. And while I don't know if this is going to be a hit for Netflix or not, and I can't talk about the film too much. I'm not going to, because the review embargo has not been lifted yet. But I'll just say this. The new Beverly Hills Cop movie, it comes to Netflix, I believe, this week on Wednesday.
Yeah, I believe you're right.
In fact, by the time people are listening to this,
it might already
be out, depending on when you get to the episode. But the beginning of that film begins at a Red Wings game at the LCA. So it's automatically
so this is going to be in your top 5 for the year right now, right?
I think so. Yeah, like automatic A+.
Have you already revealed what one of your 5 is for a mid-year report?
Yeah, at the Beverly Hills Cop. That's automatically number 1 now. So I'll get to my number 4, or I'll get to the other 4 later on in the show.
I'm weirdly excited for that movie. I think that looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah, Yeah, same. Like I recently caught up with all of the Beverly Hills Cops movies.
Ah, I'm curious what you
And
think of them. I love the first one. I think the second
mhm,
one's pretty good. I think the third one's really bad. But I'm really
yeah.
looking forward to this new one.
And I think that's generally how most people feel.
Mhm.
The first one is really great. I think the second one is equally as great and honestly might be more funny for me, like more laugh out loud funny for me.
I
But the
think
third
that's
one is
fair
terrible.
because
The third one is bad.
there's so many moments in the second one where they just let Eddie Murphy be Eddie Murphy, and it sounds like
Yeah,
he's just doing it
it's
without a
a little
script,
bit more loose, I think.
which I like
And
about it. I think
yeah,
if I have any reservations about Beverly Hills Cop 2, it's and again, this is credit to our good friends Jay Levitt and Ryan McQuaid over at Awards Watch, who are doing their Tony Scott movie series right now. I just revisit a bunch of Tony Scott films, who I think is a very underappreciated director nowadays. I love his work.
mhm.
I think where I find myself lesser on Beverly Hills Cop 2 is if I try to look at it as a Tony Scott film. I feel like he was just hired for his sunset shots for that movie,
Maybe.
because it kind of feels like it doesn't feel like a Tony Scott film at times. It feels more like an Eddie Murphy vehicle, and I think the movie works best in those regards. But if I try to also see it as a Tony Scott film,
Mm.
then I start having some reservations. So it's maybe more of just the top of mind idea that I just watched some really great Tony Scott films, and I was hoping to see more of that in there.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, and I don't disagree. It's more of a Beverly Hills Cop movie.
It is, yeah. He's a
However
director for
you
hire
want
for that
to
one.
exactly. But I still think it's great. Like in terms of direction and choreography, I think
It's
it's
fun.
as good as the first. And I genuinely think it's funnier. Like it's a more laugh out loud funny movie. So yeah, it might not feel
Mhm.
like a Tony Scott product, but as a Beverly Hills Cop product, I think it's arguably the best of the three.
Yeah,
Either way, the
it's
third one is the worst by
the
far,
third one's not great. That
and
is
I think
not great
most
at
people
all.
would acknowledge that or share
Yeah,
that
I think
sentiment.
so.
So,
Yeah, but I'm looking
at
forward to
any
this
rate,
new one.
I'm looking forward to it as well. And the opening shots of the film or of that sequence at the Red Wings game is incredible. And it was a real game they were at, the Red Wings and
Mm,
the Vegas Golden Knights, I
that's
presume
great.
last year, because the players on the ice it was last year's team.
It was last year, yeah,
So
okay. Well,
pretty
that'd be
funny.
great if that movie becomes a big hit just on Netflix. And
Yeah. So
I mean, we're
the
we're
hockey
seeing some
continues is all
the
the moral
hockey
of the story there.
continues, the movie parade's going, the hockey parade's going. We talked a lot about Inside Out continuing the box office parade, but even A Quiet Place Day 1
Well,
had a
yeah, and that's where I wanted to go next. Yeah,
yeah.
97.7 million worldwide, 52
Mhm.
domestically.
Yeah.
Not That's pretty good.
Well,
And
that's an
even
opening high for the franchise thus far.
yes. And the reviews have been really great as well, which makes it all the more shocking that it was announced earlier today the film is going to be on digital by the end of the month.
Well,
It's
does
the world
this
we live
now
in.
answer the question that a lot of us have had that we kind of knew the answer to already, but we only speculated? That short window is the problem with movies nowadays. That's the
Mhm.
problem. And why would you do that for a film that is actually having early success like this?
Well,
And,
I think this is going to become the norm. I think this is
uh,
something we need to get used to. I like
maybe
I
I'm
think
just
this is just this is
old and whiny, but I miss how it used to be.
I do too. I think this is going to be the norm unless you have an Inside Out 2 billion-dollar hit on your hands, or perhaps a Dune Part 2 which did very well, or a Barbenheimer. I think the new norm is what we're seeing now. And that
Yeah.
even these big films, because that's where, and I don't know the numbers. Obviously, those aren't in front of us, and I don't think the studios are really sharing that
hmm
information.
hmm
But from a business perspective, given the technology, I do understand why they're doing this,
Yeah.
because this is a film that is new, it's top of mind. Not everyone is going to get to the theater,
hmm
so you put it on demand, and while it's top of mind for people, then that they'll be able to recoup all the more on the digital end of it. So and I'm sure you have
Yeah.
people in your life. I know I very much do. I have people in my life that can't get to the theater often like you and I do, but maybe they'll shell out $20 for their family to watch A Quiet Place on a Friday night in
Yeah,
August.
I just think about how that benefits the movie financially and how those, how funds are distributed properly in that regard. I'd love to see the economics of that.
Well, and that's why I'd like to see it as well, because
Yeah.
on paper, I do think it makes sense to take advantage of it while it's on
The
people's
marketing
minds.
makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Yeah.
Because you could do the same thing in another 6 months after it has its theatrical run, but now we've all moved on to whatever is happening in November and December.
Yeah.
And A Quiet Place day one, is that going to be the first thing that you buy when it comes out on digital, if it came out, let's say in October or November, December, like 6 months down the line?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, the answer to that might be no, but you do it a month after it releases and it's still pretty fresh in people's minds. And look, I can't get to the theater to see it, but sure, I'll shell out $20 to watch it at home with my family.
Yeah.
I could see that being viable, which is why they're making these choices. But until, to your point, we see the economics of it, it's all guesswork.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think, what if, hypothetically speaking, A Quiet Place day one has a very successful second weekend? Will they maybe retract those plans? I'm not saying they will or they won't, but it would be interesting to see if that ends up being the case and we start seeing new trends form because of these early predictive efforts that don't come into fruition. I'd be curious about that.
That's a great point to make. I do wonder if there's going to be flexibility in this. If studios decide, hey, its second and third weekend is doing great, let's maybe push that back by another month.
Maybe.
And it goes out on digital, let's say at the end of August. I don't know. I'm curious because, like, for example, The Bike Riders, was its initial digital release date as, like a week or two after its theatrical run? Or is that something they did as a panic move to try to recoup as much as they could?
Oh, yeah. I don't know, because I forget when the timing was. When was that digital release announced in conjunction? It
was like a
with
week after.
Yeah, but you're right. Maybe? Was that always the plan, or was that an afterthought given that first
That's what
weekend?
I mean.
That's a great question.
It makes you wonder, because it does feel as if it was a little bit of a reactionary
you're right.
move rather than something that was always going to be there. Because if the bike riders hypothetically did well and surprised people and made, like, let's say $30 million on its opening weekend, do they commit to that digital release date? I don't know.
They might not. They might try to
My
say,
guess
hey, let's
is
give
no.
let's give it some more legs in theaters and see what happens. But I understand, like, there are extra costs associated with that. So again, this is where the economics are important, because like looking at the P&L, where's the profit, where are the losses? When do the losses start outweighing the profits, and how big are those losses in the theatrical space as opposed to the digital space? There's a variance there. I'm wondering what that is.
And to that point, and in contradiction to the one I just made, maybe it is something that is planned ahead of time. A Quiet Place day one was always going to come out July 30th. And that would make sense, because why else? Why would they do that when you made $100 million on your opening weekend? Like, it just doesn't make sense to do it at the end of July when it might have legs to carry it to, let's say, $500 million, let's say in a few weeks or by the end of the month. I mean, that doesn't. It doesn't, like, the math doesn't really add up there unless that was always the plan.
Unless they think, given the success of this weekend hitting that 100 million worldwide, do they believe just in that month's time they're going to make enough money to say this movie was a financial hit? Because the budget was only 60-some million or something like that. That's not a very high budget. And from what I understand, bringing someone like Michael Sarnowski of Pig fame into this, I hear a lot of people say he still retains a lot of those indie sensibilities within this movie. So if it was made kind of on the cheap, this is a movie that probably can get away with that shorter window, and maybe more money can be made by keeping it top of mind, like you're saying.
And the thing that I hate the most about this, is that I think I'm gonna have to be one of those stupid idiots that waits for the digital release because I can't go see this in a theater right now.
You are under very specific circumstances.
That's true. Like, to be fair to me, I just don't have it in me. It's not in my DNA to go to the theater and piss people off purposefully. I just can't do it. I can't just go be an asshole to people. Yeah, and for my own personal sake, it's just not who I am.
That's fair.
So, like I said earlier, I did my best to, work around it strategically for kinds of kindness. But yeah, this film is doing well. I'm not gonna find a screening, especially when I can go where it's gonna be me and 3 other people, and it's a quiet movie. No way. No way. I'm gonna cough my way through it. I'd annoy the piss out of everybody around me. I can't do it.
Yeah,
so
I think
I'm probably gonna have to wait.
You're making the wise call. I feel like that's the humble call.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm just trying to, be cordial, and we used to live in a society. I know we don't anymore, and democracy is failing, and the country is about to rip itself into shreds. But I still live in the fantasy that we had a society and people were nice to each other. And
how about this? How about I go see A Quiet Place day 1 twice, so that way I can say the second time was just your money, so that way you at least contributed to his success.
Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah,
just pay me back for that second visit.
Sounds good. At any rate, it is very exciting to see that film do well, and I look forward to contributing my $20 when it comes out at the end of the month.
Yeah, there you go.
Real fast though, before we move on the other end of that spectrum, Horizon: An American Saga, $12 million worldwide. I think it's only really had a domestic release so far, I believe. So
pretty light thus far.
Yeah, $11 million US. And going back to that initial conversation we had a month or so ago, I think that's what we talked about in Horizon: An American Saga. Chapter 1, it's a part 1 of a whole thing.
Yeah.
That, it probably wasn't going to make all that much money.
I think even Kevin Costner knew this was not going to be immediate. It was not going to be an immediate hit, financially speaking. But I think given the way that it's made, it's sort of in a similar camp to something like Francis Ford Coppola and Megalopolis, where they own these movies, if I'm not mistaken. So in some ways, like, these are movies that could fund themselves back many years down the line if they still maintain that ownership. It's more of an investment than anything else. So this is where the box office gets more interesting to talk about, because we always talk about the immediacy of box office success. But sometimes, what about those cases where movies become financial successes because of who owned and maintained the rights for them for a lengthy period of time? It's almost like buying a house, right? A house is not an immediate financial success for you until sometimes many years down the line when it builds enough equity for you, right? And maybe the market allows it to grow in its worth. So I think a movie like Horizon's almost something similar for Kevin Costner. He's making an investment in something.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an investment that could recoup more assets on future chapters as well, depending on how those are perceived, and you get the entirety of it. A lot of the criticisms for chapter 1 that I've seen isn't so much that, it isn't well made or the performances are bad. It's nothing to that.
3-hour setup. It's basically what it is.
It's a 3-hour setup. Like, that's a long viewing experience to have absolutely no payoff. However, in the context of the full saga, maybe there's much more of a rewarding experience there once you know how everything crystallizes. Yeah. And that's where, in hindsight, to your point, years down the road, it could recoup those assets for sure. Yeah. Or that investment, rather. And give it an ROI of some sort. Yeah.
Yeah. That'd be something to look back on like 10 years down the line or something like that.
For sure. Gladiator 2. We got our first look of Ridley Scott's new film starring Paul Mescal. Any thoughts on the images, the first look images we got today?
Yeah, best movie of the year.
Okay.
That's it. I don't need to see the movie. It's the best movie of the year. All joking aside, I'm excited for this one. I've always had a curiosity for this one. I had a hunch that this was going to spark interest I don't know if the movie will be good because Ridley Scott's track record is very unpredictable. He's very inconsistent. But even when he misses, I find his misses to be kind of fascinating. I mean, we talked about this with Napoleon. Not a great movie, but still an interesting one given the product that we got, right? And whether Gladiator 2 is good or not, I feel like it's going to be interesting. I feel like it's getting people's attention, which is what it should be doing right now. And that's all I care about. But I mean, these images look sexy as hell. I'll say that.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
It looks like he's cooking. He's cooking.
It looks like
right.
And say what we will about Ridley, whether he makes a good movie or not, everything about his movies feel very old school. No one makes movies like he does anymore. And I'm expecting Gladiator to actually maintain that ethos of Ridley Scott, that bigness of Ridley Scott. So I'm really excited to see that. I'm wondering if this movie is going to start another Barbenheimer-like trend, given the fact that it now opens the same day as Wicked.
Yeah, that was funny. Yeah,
I'm seeing all these like Gladiwicked or Wickadator. Like seeing all these like new things. Like people are trying to manufacture it, which I think is what's going to kill it before it could ever even happen. But I hope they're right. I mean, I would love to see something like that happen again. That'd be exciting to see that event.
And I will say the one thing that gives me a little bit of hope on it, and this was always going to be the case. If you're going to do another Barbenheimer, it's always going to be the thing that followed Barbenheimer. There will never be another original in that sense. But when that announcement was made, again, it wasn't marketing firms and studios that were driving much of that discourse. A lot of the memes and the jokes already are coming from people. It's coming from people that are just having fun with this. That's how it started the first time. So if there is any success to it, it's just because, again, the grassroots of it is organically unfolding. Even if it's a follow-up, a sequel to Barbenheimer, it's a second go around, however you want to articulate it. There is going to be a little manufacturing involved, but as long as it's happening at the ground level and it's not happening at the studio level, then I think it's fine. Then there's fun to be had. There's some like the popcorn bucket thing that started in an organic way, but as soon as Deadpool tried to manufacture it, it just became tacky and nonsensical. So just let the people have their fun.
Let the people do it. Let the people do it. They'll tell people to go. They'll turn it into that event. And
exactly.
And maybe that can manufacture itself once again, which would be really exciting to see. I just want to see people get to the theater regardless of the quality of the films in question for it. But back to your original question, Gladiator 2, I think this looks, at the very least, I'm really excited for it. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I'm excited for it as well. I thought the images were fantastic. It does look like Ridley is cooking, and I think he has been, honestly, as much as I haven't loved the Alien films. We've talked that to death. I still think those films, or at least Prometheus, looked great. I don't love Prometheus, but I think aesthetically there's some good things there.
Still an interesting movie.
The Martian is awesome. That's an awesome movie.
That is so much fun.
The Last Duel is fantastic.
I am liking that movie so much more as time goes on.
Absolutely. And yes, Napoleon is flawed, but there's a great movie in there. That 4-hour cut, I think, could be pretty good.
I'm with you.
There's like that tangibility, that big movie feel that you're talking about with Ridley is absolutely there with Napoleon. That's one of its biggest strengths for sure.
Yeah, agreed.
And I sense the same things with Gladiator too. Obviously we'll get more of a visual because I think the trailer drops tomorrow as we're recording this.
Oh, so I didn't know that. Okay.
I think that's the case. I could be making that up. That could be the drugs.
You might be right. You might be right. I tend to be rather disconnected to trailer announcement dates. Usually my awareness of a new trailer is when it first comes out. That's usually my thing. So I won't find out about a Gladiator 2 trailer until I see someone retweet it. But sure. You might be right. Maybe it is announced and I just missed it.
Okay, so I was a little off. The first trailer for Gladiator 2 releases on July 9th. So in a week. About a week.
Okay.
But soon.
Man. You almost made my week there. I was really excited about that for a second.
So in a week, we'll get more footage, and perhaps we'll be able to reevaluate this a little bit more on next week's show, I guess, depending on the timing of when we're able to record that in relation to the drop of that trailer. But either way, simply based off these images, it looks like it is Ridley Scott doing his thing. And that's enough to make me excited. And I think he has been making some pretty great movies over the last 10 years. It's been a little hit or miss, a little back and forth, but I think if this is in line with something like The Last Duel or The Martian in terms of quality, sign me up. I'm totally there.
Even if it's not, like I said, whenever Ridley Scott makes a movie I don't like, I still find it to be a fascinating failure. I'd say the only film of his that maybe doesn't fall into that category is something like Exodus: Gods and Kings, which I just think is bad. Like I don't think that movie really has any redeeming qualities. But some of his other films that I don't care for, I still find them intriguing. I find what he's trying to do intriguing. Yeah. He doesn't play by the rules. He's kind of like a jazz musician when it comes to movie making. He's all about breaking the rules, and whether you like it or not, he's going to do what he wants. And exactly. I respect that. I
agree. All right, before we move on to our top 5, I actually want to bring up Women InSession.
Oh, our good friends over there. We love
good, lovely friends over at Women InSession. So back in March, they did a Brad Pitt episode, specifically talking about his work in the 90s. And while
some disagreement between you and them.
Well, and this is where I wanted to build to, because they had some great things to say about Brad Pitt and his work in the 90s, which I very much do agree with a lot of that sentiment. Where I dissented from them is when they tried to compare his work to his recent output or his work maybe generally in the 21st century. They did not seem to care much for his performances or many of the films that he's been in the 21st century. And that created some really fun conversation internally and some debate, because you and I are big fans of his performances and some of the movies we've seen from him over the last, 20 years or so, I guess, at this point. And we talked about it briefly here on the show, our little rebuttal. I didn't really anticipate that it would turn into this fun big thing. And that's all that it is. It's been this fun conversation that we've had here internally. And so they did invite me onto their show to talk about Brad Pitt and his work in the 21st century. It was really challenging to find a time with my schedule, obviously between work and doing everything on the website and this show and everything in between, and of course my parental duties. It was hard for me to find a time to record with them. So they went ahead and recorded a rebuttal to that 90s episode without me, which released today as we are recording this. It's available right now, where they did talk about Brad Pitt and his work in the 21st century. And so I wanted to bring it up here, not to dissent or argue simply for the sake of it. He's poking the bear. I just wanted to talk about his work, because I do disagree with a lot of what they had to say. As much as I love his work in something like Fight Club or Seven, 12 Monkeys, Interview with a Vampire, he did some really great stuff in the 90s for sure. I didn't really disagree, and I guess to bring some clarity to it, I don't disagree with what they said about his work in the 90s. It was really great for sure.
Right.
Where we divided was how his career evolved as he moved into the 21st century.
Right.
I will say some of this is a little unfair, because now we're talking about a decade versus now 2.5 decades worth of work. So the volume of the 21st century it somewhat creates a little bit of an unfair comparison in my mind, especially if you want to consider something like Ocean's 11, which is one of the best heist movies ever.
Oh yeah.
And that came out in 2001, so sure, that will count as a 21st century movie, even though I feel like that in terms of Brad Pitt era, I would say that's more in line with his 90s work than much of what we got in the 21st century or what would come later with Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
But yeah, his work in the Ocean's movies are great.
I agree.
Where things change, and this is where the conversation gets really interesting, I would say is with the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. To me, that's where things begin to pivot for Brad Pitt a little bit. And especially in the context of this conversation, that's where things really do start to pivot, because his performances start to take on what I would argue is a little bit of this sophistication we really hadn't seen from him yet.
It's a more introspective route.
Absolutely. And, you know, there's obviously some comedies and some cameos and some fun things thrown, you know, in between all of these movies. But you think about his work in the assassination of Jesse James, The Tree of Life, of course, which is an all-time movie for me. I would even throw Moneyball in there in this sense as well.
Yeah.
Killing Them Softly, 12 Years a Slave, a little bit of a different performance, but I think fits the mold of where his career had turned, tonally speaking, in many regards.
It does, yeah. It definitely fits that new era. I mean, that's more of a glorified cameo in many ways, but I still think it fits the narrative of what you're going for in that movie.
Absolutely. Then you get to Fury and his performance there. I absolutely want to talk about that. And then you get into his work in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and especially Ad Astra. Like, those performances to me are some of his very best work. All of those movies. As much as I love
a lot of those performances, yeah.
In Fight Club and Seven and everything we got in the 90s, but his work in Jesse James is astounding. It is some of his very best work. And I know the ladies on Women InSession aren't big fans of The Tree of Life. In fact, I think Jalon made a comment that I couldn't help but chuckle at because of how different we look at Terrence Malick and those movies, because she said something to the effect of, when I watch a Malick film, it's all about the feelings. And I don't disagree with that. Malick does make you feel, for sure. He's an evocative filmmaker. But I think part of that evocation is the performances that come with those movies.
Yeah.
And Brad Pitt in The Tree of Life obliterates me in ways that few performances have in the 2010s. He is phenomenal in that film. It is obviously very different. It's something, it's a far cry from his 90s work for sure. But what he brings to that film in terms of the forcefulness, the prowess of it, how that character is emotionally deconstructed over the course of that film, and you see him kind of recoiling shame and regret and grief and everything that we get there at the end. It is an astounding performance. And as much as I am moved by that film and everything that comes with it, it's not just Malick. It is the performances of that film that trigger that kind of response. He's fantastic. And I've argued several times here on the show that in 2019, he won the Oscar but for the wrong film. It should have been Ad Astra.
Astra.
That to me is arguably his best performance. Full stop. I think that is arguably his best performance. Worst case, it is top 3, but I think it's in that 1 or 2 range. I think it is that good. And again, it's not what he's doing outwardly. It's a very introspective, ironically Terrence Malick-y kind of performance. That movie on the whole is a little Malick-y, which is probably why I love it as much as I do. But his performance taps into those same rhythms, and there's a level of sophistication and maturation to his performances in those films that to me outweigh some of the more rugged and electrifying and cool and, you know, kind of edgy performances you get in the 90s. And I love the edgy, cool stuff that came with the 90s. Don't get me wrong. All of that is great. But I do prefer, and I would argue that the sophistication and maturation of his later work does trump what he gave us in the 90s in terms of that edginess.
Well, it's just so different. I mean, I still sometimes think one of the best things Brad Pitt ever did was his guest appearance on Friends. That one episode is one of the funniest guest appearances I've ever seen from any major star at that time. The thing about me with Brad Pitt and the era of the 90s as opposed to his current era is that, I mean, there was a point that he was almost so like bankable and franchisable in some ways that you would then get movies like Meet Joe Black that tried to bank on the Brad Pitt ethos and the Brad Pitt charm for the wrong reasons. That's the thing. When you're that good looking, you become kind of a product for the Hollywood machine. And there are times that he did fall into that. And I think his performances in some of those examples are fine. It's certainly no Seven or Fight Club or heck, no, it's not even Thelma and Louise in that same level. But yeah, this happens to so many actors, right? Especially those that are in the, I guess, the club of Hollywood beauty, right? They have a certain thing that they're known for. That thing becomes bankable, and then they start moving past that to try and challenge themselves and do some more introspective work. I just think Brad Pitt is one of the examples that did a good job with that transition. I think he found some range and some notes that not many people mimic. He's a pretty unique actor in that regard, which is why I think this latest era of his is kind of fascinating. I love his performance in Ad Astra. I don't know if it's my favorite, but I think to call it top 3 is something I wouldn't necessarily push back on.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point in that he was able to find some new notes. Yeah. Because I do want to emphasize, because I don't want to come off as super pretentious here, and perhaps I've already missed the boat on that, but
that's part of our charm. We're always pretentious on this podcast.
Look, I love his work in the 90s. It really is great. In fact, I would still argue that his work in Seven is a top 5 Brad Pitt performance. I think it is that good, and the film is fantastic. So, like, don't get me wrong. I think his work in the 90s is still great, but I do think, to your point, as he pivots from his Brad Pitt movie star persona slightly and challenged himself, he was able to find new layers that I certainly did not anticipate at the time, and I think give those performances a little bit more heft for me. And some of it is obviously very personal and subjective. Like, I love introspective performances. Yeah. I love the quiet stillness that he can bring to a performance, or even when he is being cathartic, he's able to bring a level of reflection, which is something that you see heavily in The Tree of Life, for example.
Yeah, and that's one of your movies. The Tree of Life is one of your babies, right? So like you're going to have that kind of natural reaction to Brad Pitt because he's channeling a form of introspection that just, it's something that you specifically latch on.
I just love it. It's the same thing with Jesse James.
It's not the fact that he's just giving an introspective and internalized performance, which are things that we've argued we prefer to see nowadays. But there's a certain level of introspection that just speaks to certain people. And clearly the way that Brad Pitt internalizes things, it's something you're able to see that's just more like it's more relatable to you, I guess.
I just find more nuance there. I think there's more nuance in Jesse James or in The Tree of Life in Ad Astra than you get with something like Fight Club, for example. Like, he's really good in Fight Club, but comparatively, I think that's a performance that lacks nuance. When it's up against some of these more heavy hitters.
Yeah, I think Fight Club's a performance that's not meant to be nuanced.
And it's not. You're right. It's a product of the movie. And again, that's where I'm fighting back against, and I say that loosely. I'm mostly having fun here. But I would argue that it's not just his performances, but these films like The Tree of Life, Jesse James, Ad Astra. These are movies that I think are better than Fight Club because they come with a level of maturation and nuance and texture that is missing in something like Fight Club. As much as I really like Fight Club, and I think it's a really good movie, but I don't think it's better than those films.
I think that's more the material of that film just being as blunt as it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not just his performance, it's what he's given and what he's tasked to do. And look, he does have the cool factor in that film. There is an edginess to him that is really fantastic. I'm not trying to sit here and bash Fight Club. Don't get me wrong. I just think that those other movies have more to them. That's all. Like, I just think there's more of a sophistication to them. Like,
it is uncanny. Yeah.
Yeah. He's just given more to work with that he does less with in terms of bombacity, I guess.
Yeah.
But in that stillness is where he registers loudly, if that makes sense.
Well, it does make sense. And it's uncanny that someone like Brad Pitt is able to have it both ways rather successfully, because some actors are really good on the internalized side of performance, but maybe not so much the blunt, almost comedic side. It's our way of saying that they're versatile. This is going to be an odd comparison, but in a weird way, Brad Pitt kind of reminds me of someone like an Adam Sandler that can just weirdly do it all. And they just have very unique notes in when they do more internalized work. Like any actor can probably successfully act in a movie like Uncut Gems, but Adam Sandler does it in such a way that no one else could do it as successfully. He's got a very unique specificity in how he does that performance, and Brad Pitt's kind of the same way. It's not the same kind of performance. They're not the same kind of actors. They're very different, but I think in a high level way, I think they know how to latch onto both extremes and make them both work for their own reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even in this era, in terms of that range, we've seen him on the other end of that introspection as well, in terms of like some of the comedy that he's able to bring, and we've seen it in a bunch of cameos in recent years. But you think of Burn After Reading is the film I was trying to think of. Like, say what you will about that movie. I know it's not for everybody.
It doesn't work for me, but I like him in it.
He's hilarious. Like, he's very, very funny. And I think he's been pretty funny in some of these cameos or these smaller roles we've had, like Bullet Train, for example. Not a great film, but like him coming and going in these fun little ways, I think is really great. But like, this era of Pitt isn't defined by those things for me as much as it is, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and Ad Astra and how he fits those movies. I think he's truly giving some great performances. And another movie that we haven't really talked about here as much is Fury. I love Fury. I'm probably a bigger champion of that film than most people.
Yeah,
and
I like it quite a bit,
The cast of that film, I think, makes it what it is, maybe more than anything. It also has a terribly underrated score. Freaking incredible. Stephen Price should have gotten recognized for that, but it came off the heels of him winning an Oscar for Gravity. So I think it very much got lost in the shuffle, but I think you could argue his score for that film is just as good, if not better, than his Gravity work. It is absolutely terrific. But like, that coupled with the performances, and Brad Pitt is a big part of that. Like, he's incredible in that film. Really, really great. And channeling the same kind of introspective wrestling that defines him, and like, that's a performance that is very akin to an Ad Astra, for example, or even The Tree of Life, and how quiet and still that it is. Ironically, it's this war film that has all this action and it's high octane at times, but generally that's a quiet performance that relies on pathos that he gives to it in those quiet moments. which is what makes it so freaking incredible. Like it's so good.
I
And
like him in that movie quite a bit.
I just prefer those kind of performances. I think he's terrific in those roles, and to me, there's just more nuance than the '90s work. And that is the difference for me than our lovely friends over at Women InSession.
He surprises me a lot in this new era, and he seems to be maybe trying to go back to some of those 90s isms with this movie coming out called Wolves with George Clooney.
Yeah.
I feel like that's him trying to be the Brad Pitt of old, which honestly has me worried about that movie. I'm not sure if he's that guy anymore.
It weirdly feels off. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It feel that movie to me just feels like a gimmick. It feels like, remember with that movie Grudge Match when Robert De Niro and Sylvester Stallone both starred as boxers fighting against each other, and it was kind of marketed as this like novelty of what if Raging Bull and Rocky, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of what Wolves feels like to me, which has me really worried. But yeah, I think this era of Brad Pitt's more surprising as well, because he's delivered some really comedic performances that I've liked, such as Babylon, as well as some of these more serious performances. I look back at his work in the 90s, and I'm not going to say it's one note because it's not, but I don't think he necessarily surprised me nearly as much.
And sorry to cut in real fast, but that's another one that I wanted to mention here. I'm glad that you did. As crazy as Babylon is at times, what makes that performance so affecting, though? It's not how he channels the vigor of the first half of that film. At times, he is fun. He certainly plays into the lunacy at times. But you think about where that character goes in the back half of that film and where that character crystallizes, it is so in line with this era of Pitt and what he's forced to tap into in terms of melancholy, grief, sorrow, tragedy. Like that defines that character. And he's incredible at tapping into that. Like he's just in, and some of it is aging. It could be life stuff. I don't know.
I like him in Benjamin Button for some similar reasons in a way.
Exactly. Like this era of Pitt to me, just like movie star Brad Pitt was great. I think he's moved beyond that. I agree. I think that's why Wolves looks like it's
it looks like a gimmick of a movie. That's what it looks like.
A little surreal because like I think he's moved beyond that role, and he's much better at this reflective, introspective era that he's in now. Like those are the performances where he tends to shine the most. Yeah. Although, admittedly, again, his cameos and how he pops up here and there in some of these movies, I think is fun. I don't have an issue with it per se, but his best work is when he's tapping into that sophisticated maturation that he's so good at these days.
At the risk of majorly disagreeing with our friends over at Women InSession even more, I might make a really controversial statement here that might get them into some fighting words with me. I'm not really sure how they feel about this one, but I don't love his performance in 12 Monkeys.
Yeah.
I think that's a one-note performance. I think that movie I think he was nominated because the Academy wanted to bank on his success at the time, and it was a very loud and energetic performance, and it made sense to fit the narrative. But I don't think it's a very challenging performance at all.
Yeah,
I like the movie, but I don't think he's the best thing in it. I actually think Bruce Willis is the strongest thing from a performance standpoint in that one.
I would agree with that for sure. Yeah. Bruce Willis makes that film what it is for sure.
I agree. Heck, I even like Madeline Stowe in that movie. But yeah, I think Brad Pitt's he's done way more challenging work. I think his work in Thelma and Louise is more challenging than 12 Monkeys.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. That's why looking at the list here, there's really only one film, maybe two, because I do really like him in Interview with the Vampire.
Mm-hmm.
His work in the 90s is good. You certainly understand the appeal given his charisma and the energy that he brings to the screen.
Sure.
He a movie star. Thoroughly a movie star in every stretch of the imagination. But in terms of performance and art, I think that's something that comes later in his career. I think that's something that evolves and in a really great way. Like I think he goes from being movie star to performer. Again, at the risk of sounding extremely pretentious saying that, but I think he really becomes a capital A actor as he gets into the 2000s. And I would even pinpoint it specifically at Jesse James.
Yeah, that's probably the turning point, because mid to even early 2000s beforehand, I mean, he was doing things like Troy, that's not one of his best performances, not one of his best movies either. But yeah, I feel like Jesse
Smith. No,
I kind of like that's charming. That's charming.
Like,
but
again, like, no, don't get me wrong. I'm not talking quality of movie.
No, I think he's charming in it too. Like that's the thing. I think he's charming in it. But it's not a Jesse James like performance. It's a very
that's what I mean. Like in
yeah.
terms of moving away from movie star to actor that is trying to hone his craft. That's what I'm talking about.
Absolutely, I see that. I see that.
That's the context there. So yeah, because I agree with you. He is very charming. He's amazing in the Ocean's movies again, which came before Jesse James. He's terrific in those films.
They're also amazing.
I really like him in Spy Game, for crying out. Like I think he's really good in Spy Game. Say what you will about that film.
I need to watch that again. I think he's good in it, but I remember thinking the movie was kind of mediocre. I think,
which is fair.
I love Tony Scott, but I think that's one of his lesser films from what I remember.
Okay, I really like it a lot. I think I'm probably higher on that film than most, but I understand that sentiment. I do, and I think he's really good in it, and not great, but good. Like again, as far as movie star Brad Pitt goes, I think it's good.
Sure.
I don't think it pales in comparison again to a bunch of these others that we've named that come later.
Which is fair.
And that to me is the difference. I just feel like he found a new groove. And he found a new something inside of him that comes out in these later performances that I think are much more rigorous in terms of art and performance. Yeah. And that's all I'm saying. That's my argument. That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to diminish or say that anything that came before is bad.
There will be another Women InSession on Brad Pitt coming out now, just to keep this conversation going.
Yeah. At any rate, I do love Brad Pitt. I just prefer his later work. That's all. All right, Brennan, we need to talk about coffee.
Medicine.
Because it is our life source. You need it. You love it.
Brain fuel, body fuel. It's fuel. It's fuel. It's human gasoline.
Fuel. You need it. It is the week of the 4th of July. So we hope everyone celebrates appropriately. And look, if you're going to be lighting sparklers and fireworks, you cannot do that uncaffeinated. Those are just the rules. No. I'm sorry. You have to do that with at least 2, 3, maybe 4 cups of coffee beforehand. We cannot afford any more accidents. We have already, society is collapsing as we speak. So we can't, encourage it even further. We have to maintain composure. To do that, you need coffee. You need great coffee. You don't want bad coffee. You need great coffee. That's why we love Coffee Call, because they source specialty grade coffee from all over the world. And if you don't know what that means, I mean, you're talking about the highest grade coffee possible. It tastes great. You don't need to add any milk and sugar to dilute the bitterness or to take away those bad coffee flavors that you normally don't like in coffee. These coffees come with incredible organic notes of fruit and strawberries and blueberries or oats and chocolate, depending on the coffee that you get. And it's just so great.
It's so good. It's the right kind of dessert because it's the natural taste of a dessert-like flavor without any of the additives to turn it into something overly sweet and milky.
Yeah, and it's never artificial. This is all organic, high-end gourmet coffee that is roasted to order. This isn't coffee that's just sitting around. Coffee called roast to order. So once they get your order online, it goes into the system. That's when they roast it. You get it a few days later. It's incredible. So you get fresh coffee every single time. You got to go check them out. Go to coffeecult.com, coffee with a K, cult with a K, coffeecult.com. At checkout, use our code ISF24. Again, that code is ISF24. Use that code at checkout and you'll get 15% off your order. You got to go check them out. It's great coffee. Yeah. And again, got to stock up. You can't do 4th of July uncaffeinated. So go and check it out.
No, you will not survive.
And we appreciate them for their support. Brendan, Amazon Music.
Oh, I love music. I love music.
I know
music's
you love music.
my jam. Yeah.
You know, music is my jam. We all love music.
We do.
And if you're looking for a premium music subscription service, you got to check out Amazon Music Unlimited.
Absolutely.
Featuring a bajillion songs. I think that's an official term.
Oh, it is now.
Bajillion songs.
I think the actual term is something like 70 million, but it's growing. It's growing.
It's
growing
as
new music keeps coming out. And honestly, it's been a great year for some new music, I must say. There's some great new albums out there, and most of them you can find on Amazon Music Unlimited. It's all there for you.
It's all there. Whatever tablet, whatever device that you use, it is all available there with Amazon Music Unlimited. They have thousands of expert programmed playlists and stations. There's just, you're always going to find something that you love.
Yeah.
So whether you're looking to bump some jams to get ready for your next hockey game, or you have a dinner party and you need a playlist, that you'll discover it all there on Amazon Music. So you can get it for free for 90 days.
Yeah.
If you go to getamazonmusic.com/InSessionFilm, again, that's getamazonmusic.com/InSessionFilm. Use our link and you'll get it free for 90 days, which is very exciting. So go check it out. Enhance your music experience with Amazon Music Unlimited. And we thank them for their support. Okay, with all of that said, let's go ahead and get into our top 5 movies of the year so far. There's been some good movies to come out. I'm very excited to dig into this. Before we get into our list, though, Brendan, what do you think about the year as a whole? 2024 up to this point. Any thoughts?
I'm not blown away yet. But I will say a lot of the movies we're going to talk about I really like. But sometimes you want to have at least a good chunk of those huge hitters that you think, wow, this could even be in my top 10 by the end of the year. And I don't know if we have enough of those just yet. Now, to be fair, I've only seen like just under 50 new releases for this year.
Okay.
I think I'm at like 46 or something like that. And I've liked a lot of what I've seen to say that I don't dislike this year. I'm just not as blown away by it as I have been in previous mid-year reports. I think there's been more special films that have come out this early. But I will say, like, we've had this conversation offline as well as on a few past episodes. If you were to ask me that same question maybe a month and a half ago, I would have said this is a terrible year for film. But thankfully, it's starting to get better. Like and some of that is me finally crossing off a few blind spots that I had. It's also being surprised by some newer releases that actually did have something to really and truly offer. So we're finally getting there. I'm not blown away yet, but I think there's more to come. This feels like a year that's, again, I'm not saying it's strategically planned this way. This is obviously a coincidence. It feels like a year that's just slowly building towards something really big. And we just haven't gotten there yet. It's almost like we're on some type of upward slope. We're at the middle point yet where we're only like, we're not quite there. So, but I feel like it's going up. I feel like it is going up.
Yeah. I want to say we talked about this early on in the year. I do think the year started off pretty slow. However, things did pick up for me in the last few months, and that has excited me. And to your point, I do think there's a momentum building that will continue on as we get into the fall season. And I am very excited for that. So despite how slow I think things were to begin, there was still enough happening that kept me very engaged with the new movie year. There were some movies that came out even kind of early that I was extremely high on that will probably come up in this conversation.
Sure.
And yeah, I mean, I'd say around April or so, that's when things really started to pick up in a way where I am pretty satisfied with the first half of this year, despite the slow start. I think the year has given us some fantastic films that will contend at the end of the year, one way or another, and that has me excited. So, with that said, let's go ahead and dive into this. We're going to be talking about our top 5 here as we go, but we'll reveal some more films at the end of this conversation as well. So, Brendan, your number 5 movie of the year so far.
Well, before I get to that, I am genuinely curious if we're going to have crossover here, because I think we're going to, but I wonder how much. About a month or so ago, I wouldn't have been surprised if we had no crossover, but I feel like we're at a point now where, just given some of our recent conversations on some of these films that we just saw, we're probably going to line up on quite a few of these. At least when it comes to our top 10, there's going to be a lot of crossover, I think.
Sure.
So this might be one of those cases, JD, that we do this in order, but if you end up picking something that I know was somewhere on my list, I might just reveal it just to keep the momentum going.
Okay.
Because I think that might happen. I think there's at least 2 films, maybe 3, but at least 2 that we're both going to have. So before we get to that, I'll go to my number 5, which I don't think will be in your top 5. It might be top 10, but I don't know if it'll be in your top 5. I'm going with The First Omen for my number 5.
Good stuff.
And I think it's primarily because it was the biggest surprise of the year for me. And I'm responding to a lot of movies from this year that I just felt like had real artistic vision as far as a filmmaker behind the camera. And this is a first-time directing job from Arkasha Stevenson, at least first major big-budget film in this kind of system. And admittedly, it does feel like one of those films that was made as kind of a parallel to Immaculate that then got retroactively changed into an Omen prequel. But it's utilized well, and there is real genuine artistry at play that I just found really invigorating. I could watch this one again, and I'm sure I enjoy it again. And it has one of my favorite performances of the year, Nell Tiger-Free, as the lead. I think she's quite terrific. So for a commercial horror film like this, for one to come along that is not afraid to take some chances, I have to respect that. So while I love the idea of the film, and maybe that's partially why I have it ranked as high as it is, because it's not a perfect film, I still think, as far as being a movie of its kind, it's tapping into things that I don't think I've seen a horror movie successfully do in so long. It's really nostalgic, but looking back at the artfulness of 70s horror in some ways, there are scares in this movie that I think are truly frightening that I just haven't seen done before. The way it lingers on certain things, I think it has a really new energy in how it conveys horror and scare. I think this movie is doing some really interesting things. So interesting that it came out in the same year as a movie like Immaculate, not even the same year, almost the same weekend.
Yeah, like 2 weeks apart.
Yeah, I know. But I do think The First Omen is really great. Definitely the biggest surprise of the year for me.
I'm with you. It's one of the best surprises of the year so far. I love it as well. It's up there as far as one of my favorites of the year. I think I have it at number 10 currently on my list. Yeah, okay. I have it at 10. So I'm right there with you. I think it is really good. I don't know if it'll end up in my top 20 at the end of the year, but at the very least, I think it'll go down as one of the best surprises. And you're right about the artistry, the craft of it, the performances. I think that's a great way to transition to my number 5, because honestly, Brendan, it's the same reasons why I love it and why it's on my list. And that's Dev Patel's Monkey Man. Also a first-time filmmaker. But you talk about artistry and craft and passion on display, that is Monkey Man. And I love that it's not overly complicated in terms of narrative or thematic structure, but all that does is leave room for simplicity and cultural specificity and this emotional nuance. It's essentially the same formula as that first John Wick. It just replaces the world building and lore of John Wick with the legend of the Hanuman and Bobby's tragic childhood, which I thought was a brilliant foundation for that film. And you couple it with Patel's ambitious filmmaking, and I was blown away by it. The dilapidated and yellow hues of the underground boxing club are so vivid. The dark neon redolent streets in the city are reminiscent of Wong Kar-wai. The red and darker color palette of the luxury brothel is striking. The framing and composition is stunning for a first-time filmmaker, broadly speaking, yet the kind of audacious vision that he brings to it. And then you talk about the symbolism of the film, how that is emotionally rooted to his childhood, how it tethers to his mother. And I think all of that is fantastic as well. There's such a contagiousness to that film in terms of its action and diverting storytelling, but there's an assiduousness to it all that makes for this really full and rich experience that I absolutely adored. And Dev Patel as a performer is also stunning in the film, of course. Just so much to really love about that film. My only question is some of the politics of it, which I can't really get into because I don't know Indian politics all that much. Sure. But even that aside, you could argue that some of it is maybe a little lost in the shuffle. But that's such a small thing for me in that film. I think everything else is glorious, and there's a conviction and a passion to the filmmaking that more than makes up for that, and I love it. It's quite easily one of my favorites of the year so far.
It's a great cultural event as well. The idea of Dev Patel trying to get reacclimated to his Indian roots once again, which I think he has admitted in a few interviews. Growing up as an actor, especially when he was younger, he felt like there was a need for him to maybe distance himself from that in order to actually get work as an actor. So this is sort of like him, going back, almost coming of age once again and trying to teach us something in the process, which is why I don't really mind those politics, because it makes me want to think about it from a political and even historical point of view. Maybe it makes me want to go back and actually do some research on what he's actually depicting here and see if there's actual accuracy in that. And not every movie is meant to provoke you to do research. That's not what it's meant to do all the time. But a good movie, I think, can stimulate that kind of reaction from you. So I'm with you. I think Monkey Man's very good. I have it around number 12 right now. I think if anything, maybe some of the ambitious tactics of him as a filmmaker, I think he trips over them a little bit at times, but I love that he does. I love when filmmakers trip over their ambitions, especially this early on, and they can find what works for them. They can tap into that, that consistency going forward. And I think Dev Patel will eventually get there at some point down the line as a filmmaker. I think we're noticing a theme here because with our first two picks, we're talking a lot about artistry behind the camera, the ambition of that artistry. And I feel like that's going to be very reflective of our lists in totality. At least it's very reflective of my top 5. It's really looking at
definitely mine.
Looking, okay, like when are filmmakers really trying to come and play? And what you talked about there with Monkey Man and what Dev Patel is doing very much transitions to my number 4. And I can almost argue that both of these films have similar ambitions, also similar types of flaws and tripping over those ambitions. But man, there is something about Rose Glass's Love Lies Bleeding that just blew me away. That is my number 4. And this is a recent catch-up for me. This was actually a blind spot for quite a while. I caught up with this maybe a week ago, maybe even less than that as we're recording this, now that I think about it. But I was kind of blown away by her sheer conviction to do whatever the heck she wanted on screen here. There are images here that should not work. In fact, they probably don't work. There's, without getting too much into the details, there's a moment involving vomiting that I have never seen anything like that in a movie. I have never seen it depicted that way. You take that screen, or not even screenshot, but you take that sequence, those mere couple seconds out of context, you think you're watching a scene from Ridley Scott's Alien or something like that. It is that so severely out of place, it should not work. But I love that Rose Glass goes for it. I really appreciated that, and I was blown away by her sheer conviction for a film that's not really all that dense thematically. It's really just taking a very extreme circumstance to say what you would do for love in a very interesting kind of way. But even with that, I just think the central romance is very compelling. I love both Kristen Stewart and Katie O'Brien here. I think they have really palpable romantic chemistry, and that's really the thing that won me over as well, even if it is decidedly a simple film. So there's a lot about the conviction here that just won me over. So might be a recent bias that I'm speaking to here, but this one really kind of blew me away.
Yeah, Love Lies Bleeding is one of those early films where Brendan missed the review.
Yeah.
Had a great guest for that conversation. I do really like the film a lot as well. I admit I'm still wrestling with some of the writing. I don't think it all comes together for me. The mechanics of it are quite transparent at times.
Oh, yeah.
And you
It
can
might
see
not.
the cogs turning.
You can.
However, you are right. The central romance is great. The performances are fantastic. And the filmmaking and craft is nothing short of sublime. Like, it's really engaging. And it's a film that's wholly committed to what it's trying to do. And I just love that about the film as well.
Yeah, it's not afraid to get weird. I really like what Rose Glass is doing here. I'm very intrigued to see what she does next. And I said that same thing with her first film, Saint Maud, which I admittedly didn't love, but I was intrigued by her. Yeah, you like that a lot more than I did, but I was very intrigued by her craft in that film to say, oh, I can't wait to see what she does next. And I really like what she's doing next, at least visually speaking.
Yeah, I do prefer Saint Maud to this, but I still really like Love Lies Bleeding. I currently have this around 17 or 18 on my list.
Okay.
And it just comes down to some of the writing. I do think the film kind of suffers in the writing a little bit. Enough to make a difference when you're having to nitpick doing a list like this. But on the whole, it's a film I still really enjoyed. And it's one that I honestly am eager to go back and revisit because there's so much to really love about that film and its energy and its visuals. It's wild. It is a wild movie.
Yeah.
I don't know if I need to spend too much time on my number 4. It's making a lot of lists, and it's a film that you're all familiar with. It is Dune Part 2. It is Denis Villeneuve.
I knew you were going to have this somewhere in your list. I just didn't know where.
Sandbox.
Yeah, I kind of thought you were going to have this higher, actually.
Well, it's just turned out to be a pretty good year at this point.
Okay.
I do love Dune Part 2. If I am able to revisit it by the end of the film, maybe it'll climb the ranks for me a little bit. I still really love this film, though. I love how it toys with religiosity, and I especially love how it deconstructs so much of what we saw with Part 1, where it's this coming of age narrative, right? Paul reckoning with the idea of him being the chosen one and how that invokes the visions that he gets in that film. However, so much of Dune Part 2 is very actively trying to subvert all of that in these ways that I find fascinating and brazenly. Like, Paul is so very trying to push back against this this destiny that is being thrust upon him, and how he's trying to manifest a different reality for himself, I think is really great. In fact, he's so committed to that, he's willing to become an antagonist to his own mother, which I think is so fascinating in that film. So as it becomes this cautionary tale for messianic worship and blind followership, I just think the film in execution does such a great job of toying with those ideas of prophecy and turning Paul into this figure that polarizes, and the craft of the film, the cinematography, the performances all over the map. So yeah, I absolutely love it. Dune Part 2 will likely be a contender for me for my top 10 at the end of the year, but yeah, it's easily one of the best films of the year so far.
Yeah, I have this around number 9 in my 10 thus far. I would like to watch it again to see how well it holds up, but man, the filmmaking is just on another level. That really is the thing that saves it. Not even saves it. There's not really much wrong with it. If anything, it's very literal in some of those themes that you talked about. It's not subtle about that at all, which is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. I do think Dune Part 1's maybe a better told film as far as, a script writing exercise. I think it's more consistent in that regard, but I think Dune Part 2 sticks the landing in a way that makes it a better film. It's a more fascinating film. So I love a lot what it's doing in those final minutes based on what you're talking about. I think it's very provocative and very sad. There's a sadness to that film that I really appreciated committing to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, with that as my number 9, we've got some crossover here. This is where I think maybe we might have a little bit of crossover. We'll see. My number 3 is Richard Linklater's Hitman. So yeah, we talked about this quite extensively when we had our good friend Danny Jarabek talking even further about just the filmography of Richard Linklater in many ways, right? We kind of went down a Linklater rabbit hole at first before we actually started talking about the movie itself that we were assigned to talk about. But for a lot of the reasons that we talked about why the movie worked for us, it still feels very much like a Linklater film. It still feels like it carries the same philosophical vibes that make his movies, even despite this one narratively veering closer to being a quote-unquote movie than some of his others.
Mm-hmm.
It has one of my favorite uses of cell phones I've ever seen in a movie. And somehow it's also one of the sexiest but also unsexiest movies of the year for me, the way it focuses on role play and the sexiness of that, but also like there is kind of an ugliness to the way that this film concludes in the way romanticism is portrayed and how that's conveyed and how that's agreed upon between two partners. I think there are a lot of layers happening here that, much like our main character, it's all about different facades, different layers to this onion you can keep peeling apart.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great that it's happening, that this kind of artistry is happening for a movie that is endlessly watchable for many audiences. I think this is a pretty relatable film. Well, maybe not relatable, but I think it's pretty accessible by comparison to, let's say, other mumblecore movies from Richard Linklater, right? I think that this one definitely has an accessibility that I think some people will respond to. But I love seeing this type of complexity in a movie that is just really fun to watch and really sexy to watch. So I think it works as just a romantic comedy, but it also works as a great Linklater film. So that's my number 3.
Yeah, Hitman is without question one of the funnest films of the year. It's surprisingly titillating at times. It's hilarious. It's dramatically gripping in places. Absolutely love the chemistry of Glenn Powell and Adria Arjona. They're absolutely terrific in this film. I have this at number 6. This is number 6.
It just missed. Okay, I thought we may have had crossover with this one, but I wasn't so sure.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's fantastic. I really do like it a lot. It's just really more so how much I have responded to the 5 films above it. But yeah, no, it's a great film.
Yeah,
really
I don't know where you're going to go with this. I think I started going on a tangent. I think I know what your number 1 is. I'm not going to say what it is now because I'll let you reveal that at the end. But yeah, I wonder where you're going to go with this now for your number 3. I'm really curious.
All right, number 3 for me. This is a movie where I would not have guessed that this is where it would land when I immediately walked out of the theater. Would not have anticipated.
Oh, wait a minute. I think I know where you're going with this.
This is a movie that I just kept thinking about. I loved our conversation of it here on the show. And now it has truly become one of my favorite films of the year. I'm going with Furiosa for my number 3.
Oh, that's not what I thought you were going to say. Whoa, okay.
Furiosa is my number 3 movie of the year. I absolutely adore this film. Now, some of it comes back to what we initially talked about here on the show in terms of how it isn't what you expect it to be. It is the inverse of Mad Max Fury Road, in the sense that Fury Road was structured around its spectacle, but infused with moments of poetry into its chaos. Furiosa is structured around its parables, and it infuses moments of spectacle as it goes, which I think makes them incredibly complementary to each other. And I love that Miller is more focused on that instead of regurgitating the same formula, which would have been easy to do because Fury Road was such a big hit. People loved it. and so many critics have it as one of the best films of not just 2015, but of that entire decade.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have made sense for him to go back to that well. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do that, actually. And I respect and admire the hell out of that. And while it does give us some of that same vigor, it's kind of funny. The clip going around at the moment or recently was the action sequence halfway through the film with the parachutes and the gliding vehicles, and the camera work there is fantastic. It truly is mesmerizing for sure.
Yeah.
I just find that a little bit ironic because that really isn't what that movie's about.
It's great filmmaking.
It's great filmmaking.
It proves that people should be going to see this movie, and it should not have been a flop like it was.
Absolutely. But I just find it hilarious because Furiosa is a movie about its spiritualism and its poetry. It just happens to have these great moments of action kind of built in, as far and few in between as they might be. Like the one other clip that was going around that I actually preferred is the one take sequence, and it's shot so seamlessly you almost forget that
you don't realize that it is.
Shot.
You're so hypnotized by Chris Hemsworth.
Exactly. And that's what I wanted to get back to, because Hemsworth's performance is so engrossing, and you contrast that to Furiosa and Jack, I believe is the character's name.
Yeah.
And they're having this moment of intimacy and perhaps closure because they think they're going to die in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so tender and loving. And juxtaposed to that is Hemsworth complete lunacy. Just an absolute madman losing his mind as the camera shifts back and then begins to circle around. And like it's such an incredible union of performance and camera work and direction. Like it's just absolutely phenomenal filmmaking. And Hemsworth's performance in that moment is so spellbinding. And it deeply reminds me of, or I truly think, Brendan, it might be my favorite performance of the year. Like it's
up there
so
for me.
Good. Like
maybe
that's a little hyperbolic. I don't know.
I don't know. I thought about that. What is my favorite performance of the year? And my gut reaction first told me to pick Nell Tiger Free from The First Omen, but Chris Hemsworth is doing some incredible stuff in Furiosa. I went right back to that as well.
He's so good, and there's layers underneath the bombacity you see on the surface, and he's just one of the best working right now. Like he's one of my very favorite performers working right now, and I just love it. So yeah, I just keep thinking about this film, the performances, the craft of it all, its parabolic symbolism, which I think is brilliantly woven into the film, even if obvious at times. But the craft is just that good. Like you think about that shot of Furiosa and her mom hanging there in this sacrificial way, and how it's embedded into her pupils. There's nothing subtle about that. And look, George Miller isn't always a subtle guy. Sometimes he is. No, a lot of the times he's not.
He's going for nuance. Who cares?
But yeah, exactly. Like the texture of that and the emotion of it is so vivid and palpable, and the craft of it is so incredible that you're like, who cares how obvious it is? It's just so good. Like I just keep coming back to this movie, and I'm dying to see it again.
Wow, I did not expect that. When you were talking about our conversation on a certain movie, I felt like you were going in a direction of a movie that was obviously tailor-made for you. I don't know if I want to say it because it might still be in your top 5, and I just don't want to reveal or play those cards for you. So I won't say what that is. But earlier in this conversation, I said, if we do have crossover, I'll just jump right to it just to keep the momentum going. I didn't expect you to already pick my number 1 of the year. So Furiosa is my favorite movie of the year so far.
There you go.
So I guess we're not going to be doing the traditional buildup of anticipation. Like we're talking about the year itself building it in a way. I'm just jumping right to the climax here. Furiosa is my number one of the year for all the reasons you're talking about. It feels like a biblical epic in a very traditional way. It's a very different kind of film. I talked about it being, kind of the epic power ballad of a heavy metal franchise. If that first Fury Road was Enter Sandman, making a Metallica reference, then this movie is something like Nothing Else Matters. And I love that it commits to that. And it's not subtle. You're right, but subtlety is not what defines a good movie. There are some movies that need that, but I just care about if the conviction and the performance and the presentation of it moves me. And I think Furiosa is a deeply emotional experience, more so than I was expecting. This is much like The First Omen, one of the bigger surprises of the year for me. 2 prequels this year that absolutely blew me away. This one more so, and it's so sad that this was as much of a flop as it was. I would have loved to see this one be as successful as I think many people seem to want it to be. But I do think it's weirdly a beautiful movie. So yeah, I'm jumping right to it. This is my number one of the year. So I'm glad we have some crossover here. I think it's great.
Man, I love to hear that. And it's interesting because I saw Dune earlier in the year and was pretty blown away by it. I thought we had a really fun and thorough conversation on it here on the show. And as I noted, I walked out of Furiosa and I really liked it a lot. But if I had to guess in that moment where I would land between those 2 movies as it relates to a list like this, I do think it would have been flipped. And I do think that in that moment, I would have guessed, sure, Dune will likely be in my top 10 at the end of the year, but maybe Furiosa would drop out. I do think that is flip-flop for sure. I do really love Dune Part 2. I don't know how the rest of the year will play out. It still might end up in my top 10 at the end of the year. I think it's great. But I think there's a world where it's much more likely that Furiosa still lands in my top 10 and Dune doesn't. And I just wouldn't have guessed that based off of how those first, how I walked out of the theater of those 2 films respectively.
Yeah.
But there is something about Furiosa that just lingers and lingers and lingers.
It's grown on me as well. I've had a hard time shaking this one. It's a movie that has stayed with me. So it sounds like we're in the same ballpark there.
For sure.
I think it's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So I just went ahead and gave away my number 1. So I'm trying to think of where our order is now. I guess it's my number 2. Is that it? And then it goes to your number 2 and then your number 1. I guess we'll go in that order there.
Yeah.
I think this will get interesting because I would not be surprised if we have the same number 2. I think I know what your numbers 1 and number 2 are. Maybe the order might change, but I wouldn't be surprised if what I'm about to say is somewhere in your 1 or 2 spot.
Okay.
My number 2 is Ryusuke Hamaguchi's Evil Does Not Exist.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is a wonderful film. And again, much like Furiosa, I haven't been able to shake this one. I think it's one of the best conversations we had on any movie this year, JD. We went into that review with very little prep. We did a little bit of research, but we tried to make that a conversation about us maybe figuring out what the movie could be and having a real-time conversation about it. And I think that's what made us respond to it even more. I liked it so much in the moment. I was just in the right mindset. I was able to vibe with the film's musicality, and the fact that it really kind of started out as a visual medium for a musical piece certainly made sense. The music is certainly a character in many ways there. But talking about it in real time allowed us to find really interesting things that it's doing as not just an eco tale, but an eco fable. We really started to dissect the film as kind of a fantasy in many ways, very reminiscent of like a Hayao Miyazaki kind of thing. It's not too dissimilar from something like that. And I found that really intriguing. So it's one of those movies from the year that I don't know if I'll have the same desire to rewatch like some of these other ones, but I'm so fascinated by it. I don't think I necessarily need to. Like there's the topicality of it is practically burned into my memory. And it has what I think is one of the best town meeting scenes that we've ever seen in a movie. That centerpiece is, you might as well call it a cinematic set piece because it kind of is. It just doesn't have the traditional action flair that a normal set piece would, but it is delivering a similar type of thrill and a similar type of conviction. So I do think Hamaguchi is delivering something there. He has a very particular artistry that's just so unique and so contemplative. It's a film that's not going to be for everyone, but it's one of those films that if you are going to watch it, I really urge you to watch it, not necessarily with someone, but have someone to talk to about it with. Really try and get a conversation going. And I think the best movies are about what conversations are stimulated from it. I think it's great.
Yep, I love that film as well. I'll speak to that here in a moment because I just want to get to my number 2, which is I Saw the TV Glow.
I knew that was going to be your other one. I thought that was going to be your number 1 if I had to guess, but I knew you were going to have that one really high.
Yeah, I absolutely loved this film. I mean, you talk about a filmmaker that has an incredible grip on her storytelling and filmmaking. Jane Schoenbrun's tonal control over the material of that film and how she wants to articulate it visually, it is incredibly stunning. It is so exquisitely crafted. The use of neon hues and the murkiness of some of the visuals is utterly entrancing. There's a couple of monologues in the film, one in particular near the end of it that took my breath away. In terms of framing and composition, it is sensational. It is one of the most thoughtfully designed films of the year in terms of camera placement, performances, and evoking a very specific emotion that I just think is fantastic. And as an allegory, I think it's really incredible as well with the way it utilizes art to inform how we see the world. It's something that we've talked about here a lot on the show. I really love how art helps us see the world, how it shapes us, helps articulate feelings that we can't otherwise put into words. And here comes a film where we see Owen and Maddie transformed or defined in some way by their favorite TV show.
Yeah.
Something that might initially be comforting as they find their identities reflected back at them. But as the years pass, nostalgia begins to filter out the truth of what they experienced. And that idea is truly terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excuse me. Is truly terrifying. And there's a heartbreaking nature to how duality and memory start to manifest themselves as it relates to Owen in that film. And it does rip your heart out given those final sequences, how
quite literally
how it literally rips your heart out. It's haunting. I mean, it is really haunting stuff, but I mean that it's a fantastic film that that I really loved. Had a great conversation on it with a guest we had, Hannah, who was absolutely terrific in that conversation. And I absolutely love this film. Absolutely adore it. And one other element as well that I just wanted to speak to with it, because I haven't heard a whole lot of other conversation around this because it's such a small part of the film, admittedly. However, it is something that really resonated with me as a parent, you know, looking at this story through the lens of Brenda, Owen's mother in the film. It kind of slowly, not surprisingly for those that know me, but it did kind of obliterate me, you know, because there's a line early on in the film where she simply says, "I just want to make sure you're on the right path." And there's something about Danielle Deadweiler's performance and how she delivers that line, and just thinking about it in the context of being a parent, because obviously I'm not trans, I can't relate with the film in that specific regard.
Sure.
But I thought that line was really, really touching, and I do think it plays to a lot of the beginning of that film in some pretty major ways. Maybe quietly, but I do think it does have an impact for sure.
Oh yeah,
And
I think those scenes are great.
Yeah, so that is my number 2 of the year. I Saw the TV Glow is fantastic. My number 1 is Evil Does Not Exist.
Okay,
That's my
all right.
favorite film of the year so far. Now,
Yeah,
some of
great
this
stuff.
is a little interchangeable, admittedly. I could go back and forth with these top 3, but Evil Does Not Exist, and maybe some of it does come down to the conversation you and I had, Brendan. I agree with you. It was such a fun way to unpack that film and all of its meaning and how one could interpret the ending and
Yeah.
you know, and because it invites that kind of conversation, the film
For
does.
sure.
And I think it earns that kind of conversation. I also adore that it's this slow, methodical movie that isn't interested in pandering or hand holding. It's wonderfully crafted. The cinematography is exquisite. It's not the camera is not afraid to linger and observe. The score is excellent. The editing is fantastic. You talked about the centerpiece of the film, that town meeting scene is really great. And all of its ideas on naturalism and how people kind of interrupt those natural processes. And I think the film has a lot to say in that regard that's really interesting, but more so than the ideas themselves, it's how the film operates with this entrancing realism and weaving that through this almost fable-like structure. That to me is, it takes a skillful filmmaker to pull that off. Like this is real, but also fantasy. Like I don't know, it's crazy. Like it's. I mean, obviously he's not the first to do that, but there is something incredibly skillful.
Yeah, it's the way he does it. It's so cryptic about how he
here.
handles it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I found all of that so cleverly intuitive and inviting. And I love it. The performances are great. I love how it works as this mystery as well. Yeah, it's just great. I mean, it's filmmaking at its finest. And I adore it. So as it stands now, it's my number 1, but who knows where things will land.
There are some things here I'm also willing to admit could be in flux. And one of those big ones being I Saw the TV Glow. I currently have that around number 11, but that's primarily because I just watched that a few hours ago. That is a very, very fresh.
You're talking about homework, like big time homework at the last second. I mean, good Lord.
I know I would have tried to get to that one sooner, but I didn't get a chance to see it in the theater, so I had to shove out the $20 to rent that off of Prime, and I was away this weekend, so I didn't even give myself the right amount of days to ponder on it. So in a way, me not having it in my top 10 of the year thus far is really me admitting defeat for not just fully being able to unpack it. But I was very mystified by it. It's a surprisingly sad movie. And it's no coincidence that the quote unquote antagonist is called Mr. Melancholy. It's very literal and very on the nose in that regard. The movie's not really that subtle with some of its symbolism, what it's getting at. But like we talked about with Furiosa, movies don't need to be subtle. They just need to convince you and move you in what it's trying to do. And there's an enveloping sadness to I Saw the TV Glow that I did find very moving. It really did work for me, even though I myself can't relate to the direct metaphor at play. It is very direct in that regard, but I still found the experience very compelling. So I think that's a film that's potentially going to grow for me as I think about it more. That one could easily end up in my top 10 in a matter of days, if I'm being honest. And I love the artistry. It goes back to what we talked about earlier, the artistry, the conviction of the filmmaking here. It goes back to our theme of just responding to filmmakers really taking ambitious swings and chances and doing really interesting things with their work, with their craft.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I Saw the TV Glow, as much as I adore its symbolism and storytelling and what it's trying to say. And you're right, it really isn't subtle. I mean, there's a line of like chalk. There's like dialogue in chalk on the road at the end of this film.
Yeah,
that is as brazen as could possibly be. I mean, the film doesn't want to necessarily be subtle in its messaging. It simply wants to invoke a level of horror and uncertainty. And I think the film does a really great job doing that for sure. And how it comes through in the cinematography, in the craft. I think of the ice cream truck in the dead of the night. Like, that shot is stunning. The TV on fire is fantastic. The hallway tracking shot that everyone is talking about, I think is just so fantastic as well. You know, and I also think of that moment. This came up in our review, the moment of Owen with the TV and him talking about how he moved on and he got family and he's got kids and that he loves his kids.
Yeah.
In our conversation, we talked about how it's really intriguing that we do not see them.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a fascinating choice all on its own. And then people started bringing up these theories that what he was referring to was the TV that he's holding there outside on the porch. And you think about the context of this film, art, how it uses art to allow us to see the world. For Owen, it is this TV show. So for him to be holding on to this TV while saying that, I do think there's interestingly some merit to that idea.
It's also the choice that he's just narrating his life story. That was a direct quote earlier on in the movie about someone directly narrating.
He's an unreliable narrator. We know that to be true. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think if anything, you can even you can argue that maybe there is some deliberate plotting ambiguities happening there.
Yes.
That I think are at least fascinating.
And the last thing I'll say on it, Justice Smith gives a soul-crushing performance in that film. And you talk about surprise performance of the year, which is why I love having this category at the InSession Film Awards. I would not have guessed based off of his previous work. And look, I like him as a performer, like in terms of comedy and awkwardness. He's been very good at that. I did not see this out of him based off of Dungeons and Dragons, for example.
I know he's admittedly kind of hit or miss for me. I liked him in Dungeons and Dragons, but a lot of other stuff, I maybe I blame the material more than him. I just think he's been in some bad material beforehand.
I agree.
And with I Saw the TV Glow, there was a point halfway through where I thought, okay, I'm compelled by his performance, but I don't really know why. Like, I'm not sure if it's even working for me yet, but I'm interested in it. And then it gets to the very end where I was more or less won over fully by his performance. There's a breakdown scene that is so hauntingly frightening that leads to a bathroom scene as visceral as can be. And yeah, it landed really well for me.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. Will go down as one of the best surprise performances of the year as well. I Saw the TV Glow is great already. This is a film that jumps to the top of anyone's list simply for the fact that Fred Durst is in the film and has, like, he doesn't distract from the movie. Like, actually has a pivotal role at one point.
Jane, the filmmaker here, does a really good job trying to hide the fact that it's Fred Durst. If you don't know he's in this movie, you won't even know that's him.
Yeah.
It almost looks like he's
I did
wearing
not.
a fake
I
head.
honestly didn't realize it until afterwards. I was like, oh, that's Fred Durst. Yeah, I had no idea.
It's incredible.
Had no idea.
The Fred Durst, the Limp Bizkit himself, the director of The Fanatic.
Crazy.
That same guy.
Absolutely insane. Like, I love that so much. All right. Good movie. We kind of talked about some films that missed our list. So do you want to round out our top 10 here real fast?
Yeah, so what rounds out my top 10, and some of these I did mention already. Number 6, I have The Bike Riders. Number 7, Late Night with the Devil. Number 8, Challengers. Number 9, Dune Part 2. And admittedly, number 10 is kind of in flux. Right now, I have The Beast there at number 10, which is a film I didn't love at first, at least for the first half, but there's a midpoint thing that happens that really hooked me, and the rest of the movie kind of just took me on this ride. I do think it's very fascinating. So that's another one that could grow on me, but again, in a couple days, I wouldn't be surprised if I ended up admitting I Saw the TV Glow ends up in that top 10 in the long run.
You know, I have to retract my my statement at Brendan for doing his homework this late in the game, because I have no room to talk. The Beast is one of those movies that is considered to be one of the best of the year by many critics. And I just watched that not a few hours ago. I did beat Brendan to the punch a little bit. Maybe, right? I did finish it yesterday, I believe, as we are recording this. So I did catch up with it quite late, and I haven't had too much time to wrestle with it. So similarly, it's a film that is just outside my top 10. I have it at number 11, primarily because I haven't had a moment to wrestle with it. I would love to give it a conversation here on the show in some way, shape, or form. Because it is a fascinating film to talk about.
For sure.
But I just caught up with it and need some time to wrestle with it. But I agree with you. It is a really interesting movie for sure. As it stands, though, obviously subject to change and will change as the year goes. But at number 6 currently, I have Hitman, as I talked about. At number 7 for me, the surprise movie of the year for me, probably to this point, especially for excluding those top 5 in my top 5 anyway. At number 7 for me, Sometimes I Think About Dying.
Oh, the Daisy Ridley film. I haven't seen that yet.
Ridley. If it's not Hemsworth, that is the performance of the year for me.
Wow, I got to catch up with that one. I haven't seen it yet.
That film.
Yeah, I missed that one.
Incredible. I mean, you talk about a striking turn, and this actually complements what we said earlier about Brad Pitt and how he channels something so introspective. This is Daisy Ridley moving away from her stardom in Star Wars and doing something so utterly different. And it is entirely introspective. She utters maybe 10 words throughout the whole film, and it is a tragic, heartbreaking performance. It
Interesting.
Is so
good. Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen
Very
that one
quiet.
yet. I might have to add that to my list sometime this week.
But I loved the film, loved her performance especially.
Okay.
Really great. So that is my number 7. At number 8 for me, the comedy of the year, it is Babes, one of my favorite documentaries. Oh my goodness.
That's the one I thought was going to be higher, honestly, just given how it's a movie tailor-made for you.
Yep. No, I love it. I have that one at number 8. Number 9 for me, another one of those that just keeps growing with me, despite one major reservation I have with it. But at number 9 currently, I do have Inside Out 2.
Okay.
Really like. And then The First Omen, as I mentioned earlier, is at number 10. But that, I could switch that out with The Bike Riders, for example. I really like that film. Or even the documentary Sperm World, I think is quite great. I
have that one rounding out my top 20. I think that's the best documentary of the year so far.
Yeah. Good stuff. Really enjoy that one as well. All right. Those are our top 10 movies of the year so far. Really looking forward to the fall as we get into the second half of the year. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say, of course, leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcast or Spotify, you can reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, or you can email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. As we wind down here, I guess just a few quick plugs. Brendan, what do we have as far as reviews this week? We got A Quiet Place.
We have A Quiet Place Day One, which from what I understand will be myself and our good friend Shadon running that one.
Yep, Shadon will be there for that one.
Yep, and then we also have, correct me if I'm wrong, we also have Kinds of Kindness, the new film from Yorgos Lanthimos. Will be you, myself, and who is joining us for that one once again?
That
Max?
would be Max. Yeah.
Yes.
Writer on the show, Max.
Yep. Got some guest spots for these ones,
here.
and I'm looking forward to that conversation as well, because that's another film I'm trying to wrestle with. And I guess, spoiler alert, I don't think it all works.
Yeah, that's another one I need to sit down and wrestle with and maybe jot down a few notes, because I'm kind of with you. I don't fully love it. So yeah, we'll have those 2 reviews coming later this week, so you can be on the lookout for that. I noted earlier in the show, we have a new Women in Session. They, of course, talk about Brad Pitt. Shocking, I know. They talk about Brad Pitt. And there should be a new Chasing the Gold this week as well. So you can be on the lookout for all of that. Subscribe to the show. Subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube. or you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, however you're listening. We would love for you to join us each and every single week. We, of course, have great written content on the website at InSessionFilm.com. Shout out to Dave and all of his great writers over there.
Yeah.
Love them as well. Any final thoughts, Brendan, before we get out of here?
Well, I stand by what I said earlier. I think the year's going to get better. I'm at least more excited for some of these upcoming summer films, especially. I'm curious to see how some of these fare at the box office. I hope that Deadpool and Wolverine is not the only other mega hit financially this year. I hope something else comes in and surprises people.
Twisters.
I really am holding out hope for Twisters. I want that to be this year's Top Gun Maverick. I really do. I'm hoping for it. I really am. And I love the fact that it has an album. They're releasing a soundtrack for it.
That's so cool.
That's like such a 90s blockbuster thing to do.
Yeah.
That is so cool. I love that. So hopefully things just keep going up because the momentum seems to suggest it could be. I hope this is not the top of the hill that we're on right now.
Yeah, I'm really hoping for that. And while I'm not optimistic it's going to be a huge hit, I just want it to be somewhat successful, however you want to define that. But I'm really rooting for Trap, M. Night Shyamalan's Trap.
Gosh, I'm looking forward to that so much.
Cannot wait for that. Cannot wait for that. So, I'm really rooting for that one to do well.
Actually, as far as upcoming movies this summer that I'm most looking forward to, that might be the one that's top of the list for me.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Twisters is right up there as far as anticipation goes, but Trap, Sing Sing looks really good. Curious
Agreed.
for that one.
Long Legs, I've heard. Long Legs.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, that looks incredible.
That one looks absolutely fantastic, and I've heard nothing but great things.
Same.
And, we joked about it earlier in the show, but really looking forward to Beverly Hills Cop, this new one.
I am too.
Check that one out as well. So, and who knows? Maybe by the time we get to Chapter 2, Horizon will come full circle, and maybe we'll like it. Who knows?
Yeah, unless it's just another 3 hours of setup before Chapter 3.
It could be. I mean, who knows? I like the idea of a huge epic Western. Kevin Costner. Like, it all sounds good on paper.
I agree.
So I don't know, but maybe it's just something that will only work in totality and not as 3-hour setups.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know.
At any
We'll
rate,
see. I like the idea of it as well.
With all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Hemsworth, Oscar, let's get that train going.
People, go see Furiosa.